I've been reading Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, and I've done a couple videos on it already. And there's a few realizations I'm coming to, or hypotheses, some realizations, some hypotheses. One realization is that I seem to have, I wouldn't go as far to say an obsession, but in that vein with Nietzsche, and in a somewhat combative way, right? Almost a competitive way. I find myself reading, the book, and obviously he's extremely intelligent, well thought out, all those things. But I find myself constantly challenging and combating in my head, what he's saying, and trying to find holes in it and disagreeing with it, things like that. And my first reaction to that is like, that seems not ideal, right? In some ways, it's almost like I feel threatened by him or feel a need to compete with him, which shouldn't be, right? It's just input, take in the input, process it, parse out what's useful, that type of thing, digest it the right way. But I think because he is so well regarded, and when I read his book, he speaks with such certainty on topics that triggers me, and that triggers my reaction to certainty and authority, and this view that he's got it all figured out, right? That he's got it right. And I don't think he necessarily claims that, although his writing certainly indicates it. So it might be more of a statement about me than it is about, him or his writing or people that like his writing. But it drives that reaction. So I admit that up front. The other piece, though, which I guess goes to the next step of that is, so when I see somebody speaking with such certainty, my natural inclination, for better or for worse, is again to challenge that and to poke holes and say, well, how are you so certain? Why are you so certain? Is there something there, or is it false certainty in some way? So as I probe his writing, there's indications to me that he should not be so certain, right? He shouldn't be speaking the way he is. Now, it's difficult, right? Because he talks about a lot of different topics, and he's got a lot of different views, which logically make sense. And as I've talked about before, when you have somebody that intelligent, who's that thoughtful, and they start putting ideas down on paper and speaking about things like the nature of man and how we should function and morality and virtues and all those things, you could weave together a cohesive, compelling story that a lot of people are going to read and say, hey, this makes a lot of sense. This makes so much sense, it almost feels like it must be true. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but it's certainly a risk of that with Nietzsche. So you're trying to distinguish. What is it? Is he uniquely brilliant and has unique insight into kind of some form of objective truth, and that's why he's speaking what he's speaking? Or is he just like the rest of us, right? At the end of the day, maybe smarter on the spectrum, but he's spinning his story of it, what he thinks it is, and he's just better than most at spinning the story. So the two things that make me question and say, hey, he's not unique in this, right? He doesn't have the right, if you will, to declare certainty. We've talked about this before, right? Certainty is a pinky promise, as it would be with my son, or it's as Richard Feynman would say, he knows what it means to truly know something. That threshold is so high to say, I am certain about this thing. So bluntly put, where does Nietzsche get off saying he's certain about this stuff? How man should function, how society should function, what the attributes are of the higher man. So the two things that call that into question for me is one, the way he speaks about women. Frankly, he's very derogatory towards women. Now, I understand he lived in the 1800s and it was a different time, so I get that. But in some ways, his writing about women is so simplistic and so elementary that it's hard to imagine somebody could think that basically, that third grade level math logic when it comes to women, but then be the most advanced PhD when it comes to morality and good and evil and how men should live, society should function, etc. So that's troubling for me, right? He has passages that talk about women as cooks, and that, if they were smarter, they would have realized how to become healers through their cooking, and all different things around women. There's lots of passages about it, and you could start to probe and say, like, what's behind that, right? Is there something with his sexuality that comes into play? Did he not have success with women? Was he in love with a woman and they didn't love him back? You can imagine there's all sorts of things. But for me, again, I look at the logic, I look at the sophistication, the maturity level, the math level that he's using, and it's too basic when it comes to women. Similarly, I would say when it comes to him speaking about Germans, so he is German, and he dedicates a decent amount of the book to talking about unique German culture and the attributes of Germans, and speaks very, mostly fondly, but criticizes them a bit, but speaks about Germans as if they are very unique than any other group or country in Europe or the world. Now, that's not surprising because he is German, so you'd say, well, yeah, of course, he has unique insights, he has like, get it, totally get that. But if we're talking about somebody who has the right to declare certainty on morality and how humans should function, I would assume he could rise above that and recognize that although he is from that country and there may be some unique attributes, you have to understand that they are just human like every other country, and every country thinks they're unique, and every group thinks they're unique in some ways. I would assume he could rise above that. Again, third grade level math versus PhD level math. That's not a sign to me of PhD level math, right? So those two things, I don't have certainty on it. That doesn't prove to me that Nietzsche is wrong, but it indicates, right? It's evidence that suggests that likely wouldn't be the case if he was this unbelievably, uniquely profound, insightful person who was able to declare certainty and know things about morality and how humans should function. Now, to practice what I preach, it is entirely possible that he is totally right? Everything he believes about morality and the higher man and how, we shouldn't play down to the average person, and people that are dominant should be dominant, and women perhaps aren't as good as, or are as bad as he thinks they are at times, and Germans are as unique as he thinks they are. Maybe. I can't say for certain that he's wrong. I don't believe he's right, but I can't say for certain. So that's what makes this tricky, and that's what makes anybody who declares certainty like this a difficult person to deal with, because you can't necessarily disprove it. You can look at a bunch of data and facts and science and qualitative evidence and say more likely than not it's wrong. But when you're combating somebody who's speaking with certainty and you're saying, well, I can't be sure, it makes it tough. So is it possible he's right? It's possible, but it would be very unlikely for me for those reasons. So again, I come back to this first point. I have this weird battle going on in my head with Nietzsche, and I should probably get underneath why that is more so than just the obvious, the authority, the certainty. There's something that speaks to me about it. But my end conclusion is, if he had the right to speak with that certainty, I would expect to see it come through in everything he spoke about. And there's too many instances of areas where I don't see it. It looks like too basic, third grade level math, and I wouldn't expect that.